A recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. The GDP, the gross domestic product. Now, Q1 of 2022, we were slightly negative. And I believe tomorrow, July 28th, 2022, we're going to find out Q2 GDP, since we just started Q3 3 weeks ago. In addition, Microsoft released its Q2 earnings, I believe, today, and they did pretty well given everything. I know once that was released, the stock market had a bit of a bump. Amazon's Q2 earnings come out this week as well. And let's see. So we have I'm looking at an article. It's like a preview. So analysts estimate 14 cents versus a 75-cent increase on Q2 fiscal year 2021. So quarter over quarter, year over year. Of course, everybody knows that AWS, or the Amazon Web Services, that's basically what keeps the lights on at Amazon. Amazon fulfillment, as a general rule, does not make a lot of money. Well, it makes a lot of money, but almost the entire amount of money gained through fulfillment is dropped right back into the expansion of the fulfillment system or additional fulfillment centers. So fulfillment, Amazon fulfillment, kind of operates in a negative because the money that is made is dropped into building more fulfillment centers. I know I spoke last week about the price of gas, and here in the Central Virginia area, $3.88 a gallon. That's roughly down $1 a gallon in the last month. And some friends of mine they're celebrating that gas is $3.88 a gallon. I'm like, you realize that that's not a good thing. I guess it's better than $4.88 or $5.88 a gallon, but you really shouldn't celebrate $3.88 a gallon. So it no longer costs $76 to fill up my tank. It now costs $63. Certainly way too much. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Common Sense Practical Prepper podcast. My name is Keith, and this is episode 6. So, just talked a little bit about we're expecting negative GDP growth tomorrow, and that officially, I guess by definition, puts us into a recession. So I know I always said that I was going to try to do my darndest not to bring politics into the podcast. And then with the caveat that it's very difficult to talk about the economy and not talk about politics at the same time, since I'm a very firm believer that there is a definite intersection between the two. So we look at the negative growth. We're going to be in a recession as of tomorrow. I guess you ask the average, Joe citizen in Iowa, somewhere in the Midwest, the Rust Belt, they're going to tell you that we've been in a recession for quite some time. You talk to folks that are, paying sometimes 10, 15, 20% increase in certain goods at a grocery store, people not really able to afford the kind of food that they were purchasing a year ago. They will certainly tell you that they have been in a recession. But tomorrow, I guess, is we fulfill the definition of a recession. Of course, Russia and Ukraine are still at war. But a couple days ago, they negotiated a kind of, not really a truce or a ceasefire, but Russia allowed Ukraine to ship some grain out of Odessa, and then Ukraine promised not to destroy the ships or anything like that were transporting Russian grain. However, that didn't last very long because the port of Odessa on the Black Sea was struck by several Russian missiles, and part of that port received some significant damage. So much for that. But even if the Ukraine and Russia was to start shipping that grain again, it's going to take a long time for that to catch up because of the deficit that we've been working with for the last, 3-4 months now. In addition, you look out west in the western United States, like Portland, Oregon, 103, 105, not even counting the heat index. So you have a heat wave, or whatever you want to call it. Here in Central Virginia last weekend, 108 with the heat index. It hit 99. So 107, 108 with the heat index. Sunday was not much cooler. Blame it on global warming. I just call it summer, but that's just me. The president COVID about a week ago, so he was isolating, social distancing, and all of that. And I heard he tested negative today, so he's back out doing his thing. So all of these things together, you have the extreme drought out west, you have the incredibly high heat. It all comes together, and what it really does, it erodes, I guess, consumer confidence. So if you go out, again, just grab, Joe Schmo on the street, and they're not going to be very confident about their current situation and the future situation. It is a very real possibility that in the next several weeks or several months, there's going to be portions of the world and the people that live in these areas that are going to go through significant hardships with a potential, for starvation. China and a few other countries, they've been hoarding their grain for the last several months to make sure they can feed their people. Whereas here in the United States, the breadbasket of the world, we're basically sending our grains and we're selling them to the highest bidder. I'm not going to get into corporate greed and all that kind of stuff, but, money makes the world go round, but it does seem a little suspicious that we're letting, whatever country purchase our grain when we certainly have the ability to put it to use here. Then if you've been watching the news, Sri Lanka, and that place is just a hot mess. Rioting, they have no food, no fuel. That country's in real, real bad shape, and it's not getting much better. So there's really not anything on the horizon that leaves me with any sense of optimism. So we're going to talk about prepping in reference to the latest developments in the economy, which are not good. I think in the last podcast I talked about the price of corn, the great value corn that I got at Walmart. Now, your economists, they'll gauge, the economy, futures. They'll, soybeans, beef, wheat, all sorts of grains, pork belly, whatever that is. That's like, the futures market. And, you look at whatever the price of a barrel of oil is, say it's $100. I'm not even sure what it is. That's a price in the future that, I don't know how it happens, or I don't know how these people decide on futures, on the price of something in the future. So if a barrel of oil goes up $5 today, that's the future price in the futures market. But damn if they don't raise the price of a gallon of gas the next day. And the thing about gas prices, they'll go up very quickly, but when they drop very slow. And I doubt seriously if we're ever going to see gas at a year and a half ago, $2.20, $2.30, $2.50 a gallon. I don't think that we're ever going to see that again. So with no real optimism, if you haven't started doing any sort of preparation, any sort of prepping, you really need to start. Back to the corn example. I believe it was 48 cents, and I need to drag out my receipts. 48 cents a can at my local Walmart, and then I believe it was 58 cents a can about a week or 10 days ago. Now it's gone up another 2 cents, so it's 60 cents, and that's just here in Central Virginia. Who knows what that can of corn costs in Minneapolis or Dallas, Texas. But I noticed for the longest time, Walmart was not raising the prices on a lot of their food. Now, your Del Monte and your other brand names, Ocean Spray, if you want to talk juices and things like that, that price is pretty much dictated by those companies, by Del Monte, by Ocean Spray. So the great value corn, even though it has an Amazon, it has a Walmart label on it. You might be able to buy it on Amazon. A Walmart label on it. Who knows, where this comes from or who technically puts it in a can. But, Walmart has done a very good job of not raising those prices. So when I see those prices start to creep up, 10 cents, now 12-cent increase, that gets me a little bit nervous because, Walmart, they buy in volume. That's why their prices are relatively less expensive compared to other people. So, you look at Del Monte, I think their corn was like $1.70. So much more, than the great value corn. And to me, they taste the same. So when I see Walmart raising prices on a can of corn, 2 cents in a week and a half or 2 weeks, that to me makes me a little nervous because if Walmart is raising the price of the great value brands, I don't even want to look at the price of some of the other name brands. Did a Costco run this past weekend, and I really need to get in and dig out my receipts from my previous visits to see how much the prices have increased. I picked up the usuals, picked up several cans of tuna, several cans of chicken breasts, pulled pork, grabbed a 6-pack or a 9-pack of Spam. They had a really good sale on pork chops, boneless pork chops. These things, they're super thick. They must be 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick. These things are monsters. When I first picked them up, I thought it was, like 2 layers, one on top of the other. No, it's just one big-ass pork chop. Definitely the kind of pork chop that you would butterfly and hammer into some sort of, a schnitzel or something like that, a tenderloin, something like that. But anyway, I digress. So if you haven't done something, please do something. I know I talked about the price of corn and how much it's increased. So now it's 12 cents. So whatever, 12 cents times 24 is, somebody do the math for me. That's how much it's increased since I purchased it. So if I was to go out and purchase that exact same can, I'd be paying 12 cents more than I did a couple months back. And there's certainly no indication that any of these prices are going to come down. All right, folks, that was just a quick take on the latest economic indicators as I see them. I think in the next podcast, I want to talk about what I call social decay. I think that's something worth talking about, especially if you live here in the United States. I think it has a lot to do with, how folks look at each other and how we're devolving as a society. I don't see a lot of love out there. I understand you turn on the news and it's, somebody got shot, somebody got robbed, that sort of thing. But I don't want to exactly put my tinfoil hat on first, but I'm a firm believer that we're growing apart as opposed to growing together. And given that, and given what's going on in the economy and the recession and how it's going to get worse, this is a recipe for, I don't want to say disaster, but for significant hardships. So without giving too much away, I think probably the next podcast, or maybe the next one after that, I certainly want to do some information, provide some information about long-term storage of water and that sort of thing. But, you know, there's not much love out in the world right now. And again, you know, maybe it's kind of like the price of gas, you know, hate and the dislike for our fellow human beings go up very quickly like the price of gas. But then to get everybody back together and loving each other, probably going to take a long, long time. If you'd like to reach me by email, practicalpreppodcast@gmail.com. Got a couple emails this past week. Thank you very much for emailing in, folks. I go ahead and respond to all of my emails. It's not like I have 1,000 and it takes me a long time. But if you do email me, I will email you back. And to the person that emailed me this week with some words of encouragement, thank you very, very much. It means an awful lot. As usual, be careful out there. Take care of one another. And until next time.